James Collier scored 193 points in the Family Feud Fast Money round on a Thursday afternoon in April. And when Steve Harvey read the final number out loud, James sat down on the stage floor and covered his face with both hands and did not move for 11 seconds. Not because of the score. Not because of the $20,000. Because his daughter Brianna was standing 6 feet away from him behind a curtain, and he did not know it, and she had been standing there for 4 minutes, listening to her father answer questions about her. What she liked to eat, what she wanted to be, what she was afraid of, what made her laugh, and every answer had been exactly right, and she was pressing both hands flat against the curtain fabric, trying to hold herself together, and she couldn't. And James Collier, 44 years old, sanitation worker, single father, a man who had not asked anyone for anything in 19 years, was sitting on the floor of a game show with his face in his hands. Because the number on the board was the least important thing that had happened in the last 4 minutes. Steve Harvey stood at center stage and looked at James on the floor and looked at the curtain and looked back at James. And then he said, quietly, to no one in particular, and to everyone at once, "Not yet. Let him have this." James Collier had been alone with Brianna since she was 4 days old. Her mother, Denise, had left the hospital on a Tuesday. Not dramatically. Not with a fight. She had simply not come back from a walk she took down the corridor at 2 in the morning, and by 6 a.m. The nurses had found James in the chair beside the bassinet, awake, with Brianna against his chest. And when they asked where his wife was, he said he didn't know. And he said it in the voice of a man who had known for longer than he wanted to admit that this moment was coming. Denise had struggled with depression since before the pregnancy. James had known. He had held on. He had believed, the way people believe things when love is the only evidence they have, that the baby would change something. The baby did change something. Just not what he had hoped. He drove home from the hospital alone with Brianna in a car seat he had installed 3 times to make sure it was right. He carried her into the apartment on Garfield Avenue in Memphis, Tennessee, and he set her carrier on the kitchen table, and he stood in the kitchen and looked at her for a long time. He was 25 years old. He had a GED, a city sanitation job, and $340 in a checking account. He had a mother in Birmingham who was sick, and a brother in Nashville who was unavailable in the specific way that certain brothers are unavailable. He had a baby daughter looking at the ceiling of an apartment that was very quiet. He said out loud, to the apartment, to whatever was listening, "Okay. I've got her. We're going to be okay." He did not fully believe it yet, but he said it. And saying it was the first brick. The first years were the architecture of pure logistics. James learned to braid hair from a YouTube video at 11:30 at night and practiced on a doll head he bought at a dollar store until he could do Brianna's cornrows without her wincing. He learned which pediatric clinic had evening hours so he didn't have to miss shifts. He packed lunches at 5:15 every morning and left them in the refrigerator with a sticky note. First a drawing of a sun, then a smiley face. Then, when Brianna learned to read at 4, a word. Beautiful. Every day. The same word. He packed her lunch every school day for 13 years, and every lunch had a sticky note, and every note said the same word. Because he had decided early that there were things his daughter needed to hear so often they stopped being compliments and became facts. Brianna grew up knowing her father worked early and worked hard and was always, without exception, at the kitchen table when she got home from school. Not always awake, there were afternoons she came home and found him asleep in the chair with his work boots still on, but there. Present, she did her homework at the table next to his sleeping form more times than she could count. She learned to be quiet around his exhaustion, the way children learn to be quiet around sacred things, because she understood, without being told, that his tiredness was the shape of her life, that every hour he spent in that chair with his boots on was an hour he had spent making sure she had what she needed. And that wasn't even the part that made Steve cry. What Brianna did not know, what she had never been told, what James had carried alone for 19 years, with the particular silence of a man who believes that certain weights are his to bear and no one else's, was the night of Brianna's 8th birthday. James had been planning the party for 6 weeks. Not a big party, a kitchen party, streamers, a cake from the grocery store bakery, 3 of Brianna's friends from school. He had put aside $40 from 4 paychecks. He had the streamers in a bag in the closet. He had ordered the cake. He had written the names of the 3 friends on a notepad and confirmed with their parents. 2 nights before the party, the transmission on his truck went. The repair estimate was $480. He did not have $480. He had $40 in the party fund and $112 in his checking account. He called the repair shop and asked what the minimum was to make the truck drivable. The answer was $380. Without the truck, he could not get to work. Without work, there was no anything. He sat in the kitchen at midnight and did the math 7 different ways. The math came out the same every time. He used the party money. He paid the $380. He still needed $100 more, and he borrowed it from a coworker named Frank, who didn't ask questions. The cake had already been ordered. He called the bakery and asked if he could cancel and get a refund. The refund policy said 48 hours. He was at 47 hours. The woman on the phone paused. She said, "Sir, is this for a child's birthday?" He said yes. She said she would issue the refund anyway. He thanked her so genuinely that she told her manager about the call, and the manager called back the next day and said the cake was on the house. Brianna's 8th birthday was streamers and a free cake, and 3 friends in a kitchen, and she said it was the best birthday she had ever had. And James watched her blow out the candles and thought, she doesn't know. She's never going to know. Not because I'm going to hide it, because I'm going to make sure she never has to think about it. He kept that promise for 11 more years. Brianna was 19 when she found the notepad. She was home for a college break. She had gotten a partial scholarship to study nursing at the University of Memphis, which James had told approximately everyone he had ever met, including strangers in the cereal aisle, and she was looking for a pen in the kitchen junk drawer, and she found a spiral notepad with a rubber band around it. She took the rubber band off. The notepad was full of her father's handwriting, dates and numbers and short notes, going back years. Brianna's school shoes, $34. Frank loan repaid April. Cornrow tutorial video saved. Cake free, thank God. Scholarship application submitted. Do not tell her yet. Don't want her to worry. She sat at the kitchen table and read the whole notepad. It took 20 minutes. James was at work. When she finished, she put the rubber band back on and put the notepad in the drawer and closed it, and sat very still for a long time. That night she called her college roommate, a girl named Priya, and talked for 2 hours. She did not tell her father what she had found. She carried it the same way he had carried things, quietly, privately, with intention. 3 months later, Priya called her and said, "I submitted the application." Brianna said, "What application?" Priya said, "Family Feud. I did it in March. They just called. Your dad's going to be on the show." Brianna said nothing for 4 seconds. Then she said, "Priya." Priya said, "You're welcome." Steve would later call what happened behind that curtain the most important moment of his career. The production team had arranged everything. James came on with 3 cousins. He didn't have a large family in Memphis, so his team was cousins from Birmingham. good-natured and loud and happy to be on television. James played the way he lived, focused, warm, unhurried. He was good at the game. The audience liked him immediately, in the specific way audiences like people who are not performing, who are simply being themselves, because they have long since stopped having the energy to be anything else. Brianna had been brought in through a side entrance an hour before taping. She had been briefed. She knew the curtain would be at center stage. She knew she would hear her father's voice. She did not know, until she was standing behind the fabric, that hearing his voice on a stage, hearing him answer questions about her with the same unhesitating certainty he'd had at 5:15 every morning over a lunch bag, was going to undo her this completely. When the fast money round started and Steve asked James what his daughter's biggest fear was, and James said, immediately, without pausing, that I'm going to work myself to death before she can take care of me back, Brianna put her hand over her mouth, and the production assistant standing beside her behind the curtain quietly handed her a tissue without making eye contact. The studio fell completely silent when the final score landed at 193. James sat on the floor. Steve said not yet. The room held. Then Steve Harvey walked to the curtain and put his hand on the edge of it and looked at James still sitting on the floor and said, James, 19 years ago you drove home from a hospital alone and said you had her and you were going to be okay. James looked up. Steve said, she heard you. And he pulled the curtain back. Brianna Collier walked out from behind the curtain, and her father looked at her from the floor, and neither of them moved for 3 seconds. And then James Collier stood up the way a man stands when every tired muscle in his body is suddenly unimportant, and Brianna crossed the stage and walked into his arms. And James held his daughter the way he had held her 19 years ago in a hospital chair at 6 in the morning in the quiet of a life that had just become entirely his responsibility, and he said into her hair the thing he had said to an empty apartment when she was 4 days old, the thing that had been true every day since. I've got you. We're okay. The crew was crying. The camera operator on the left dolly had stopped moving. The boom operator held the mic completely still. The production assistant who had given Brianna the tissue behind the curtain was sitting on the floor of the wing with her back against the wall. Steve Harvey stood at center stage with the curtain fabric still in his hand and did not speak for a long time. When he did speak, he turned to the audience and said, "Let me tell you something." He said it the way he says it when what comes next is the truth and not the television. I was at a gas station years ago with nothing in my pocket, nothing ahead of me that I could see. And a man I had never met, old man, work jacket, nobody special on paper, looked at me and said, "God's got a plan bigger than your pain." I held on to that. I built everything I have on that one sentence from a stranger. He looked at James and Brianna. This man built everything he has on one sentence he said to himself in an empty kitchen. We're going to be okay. He didn't know if it was true. He said it anyway. He said it every morning for 19 years. And it was true. It was always going to be true. He just had to keep saying it long enough to find out. He looked into the camera. Everyone at home, every parent watching right now who is at a kitchen table at midnight doing math that doesn't work, I see you. This show sees you. You are not invisible, and you are not alone, and the thing you're building is real. Even when the numbers don't add up, and the truck breaks down, and you have to call Frank and borrow $100. It is real. Keep building. The studio fell completely silent. Then Steve turned to his producers and said, "Get me Priya." Priya, Brianna's roommate, was in the audience. She had been brought in as part of the plan, seated in the back row with strict instructions not to react visibly, which she had failed at comprehensively, and was still holding a tissue. A production assistant brought her a microphone. She came to the stage. Steve said, "You submitted the application." Priya said, "Yes." Steve said, "Why?" Priya thought about it. She said, "Because Brianna read the notepad and she couldn't tell him. She needed someone to tell him for her. That's all I did." Steve said, "That's not all you did." He looked at the audience. Sometimes the most important thing a friend does is make the call the other person can't make. He looked at James. "Your daughter has good people." James nodded. He was still holding Brianna's hand. He had not let go since she walked through the curtain. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to James and said, "The notepad." James looked at him. Steve said, "Brianna told us about it." James looked at his daughter. Brianna said, "I found it, Daddy, I'm sorry." James was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You weren't supposed to find that." Brianna said, "I know." She paused. "Did I hurt you? Did I say something wrong?" James looked at her. He said, "What?" She said, "By finding it. By knowing. I wasn't supposed to know. Did I make it worse?" James Collier shook his head slowly. He said, "Baby, you finding that notepad is the best thing that ever happened to that drawer." The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey pressed his lips together. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he looked at James and said, "She did it for you." James said, "I know." Steve said, "No. I mean, she found that notepad, and she didn't run from it, and she didn't make it about herself, and she found a way to say thank you in the only language she knew you'd understand. She put you on a stage." He paused. "Most people get 19 years of a father like you, and they don't know what to do with it. Your daughter knew exactly what to do with it." Both families won that day. The opposing family, the Delgado family from San Antonio, had watched the entire exchange from their podium, and their team captain, a woman named Gloria, walked across the dividing line after the show and pressed an envelope into James's hand. Inside was a card that said, "From one single parent to another. You showed us what it looks like to keep going." James read it twice and folded it and put it in his shirt pocket, next to where his heart was. The clip was uploaded on a Sunday night. By Tuesday, it had 48 million views. By the following Monday, 220 million. The hashtag "We're Going to Be Okay" trended in 36 countries for 10 consecutive days. The story was covered in 17 languages, parenting publications, sociology journals, and 2 separate congressional staffers' offices cited the clip in discussions about single-parent support policy within 60 days. The notepad photograph. Brianna had taken a picture of the open page with the birthday cake entry before putting it back in the drawer, and she posted it that Sunday night, was shared 1 million times, and became, according to several media analysts, one of the most shared single images in the show's history. The Curtin Foundation, named for the moment and incorporated in Tennessee 8 days after the taping, focused on emergency financial assistance for single parents facing the specific category of crisis James had faced. The broken truck, the transmission, the 48-hour window where one thing going wrong means several things going wrong. In its first year, the foundation dispersed $2.8 million in direct emergency grants to single-parent households in 30 states, averaging $800 per grant, enough in most cases to cover the thing that couldn't wait. James Collier joined the advisory board. He still works the early shift. He still leaves sticky notes. He said in an interview that he switched from writing beautiful every day to writing something different each time, because Brianna told him she had kept every single one and was running out of places to put them all. Brianna Collier graduated from the University of Memphis nursing program 2 years after the taping. James was in the front row. He brought the notepad. Priya sat beside him and cried through the whole ceremony and was not sorry about it. After the ceremony, in the parking lot, someone took a photograph of James and Brianna standing in front of his truck. The same model, different year, transmission intact, and Brianna was pointing at the truck bed where James had taped a sticky note to the tailgate that said, in marker letters 6 inches tall, "Beautiful." 8 months after the taping, a journalist visiting the apartment on Garfield Avenue found the kitchen mostly the same. Table in the center. Chair by the window, the drawer with the notepad. James was at work. Brianna was at a clinical rotation. But the porch light was on. It had been on since the night Brianna left for college, and James had told the reporter, when asked, that he left it on every night because he wanted her to be able to see it from wherever she was, and know the door was open, and someone was home, and she was not alone in the world. It had been on for 3 years. It would be on for as many more as the bulb held. Some fathers build their children a house. James Collier built his daughter a fact. The fact that she was beautiful, that she was worth every notepad and every midnight calculation and every borrowed $100 and every transmission that broke at the worst possible time. He did not build it with money. He built it the way all lasting things are built, one morning at a time, one lunch bag at a time, one sticky note at a time, until the fact was so solid that when his daughter stood behind a curtain on a stage in Los Angeles and heard him answer questions about her, every answer was exactly right, because he had spent 19 years making sure he knew her completely, and she had spent 19 years becoming someone worth knowing. Subscribe right now and hit the bell so you never miss one of these. Every week there is a story like this one that the world almost didn't hear. Leave a comment below. What is one thing your parent did that you didn't understand the cost of until you were older? Share this today with someone who is doing it alone and needs to know it counts. The Curtain Foundation link is in the description.